Hi there, and welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins inside a quiet little clock shop, where time itself seemed to stop the night its owner was found dead. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, only every clock in a room, frozen at the exact same minute. When Hercule Poirot is called to investigate, he discovers the clockmaker had been keeping a secret, one carefully hidden in the rhythm of time, and one that someone would kill to protect. Why did every clock stop at that moment? And what truth was ticking just beneath the silence? Stay with us till the end. And if you love mysteries where time itself holds the final clue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The Village That Stopped Time. The small English village of Belhaven was the sort of place where life ticked along quietly, a pattern of market days, church bells, and tea in the afternoons. Yet on one gray morning, every clock in Belhaven stopped. Each one, from the grand tower clock above the post office to the humble mantel clocks inside the cottages, had frozen at precisely 6:42. It was as if time itself had taken a breath and refused to move on. The villagers first thought it was a coincidence, perhaps a surge in the power lines, they said. But the truth was stranger. For at that exact moment, the village clockmaker, a quiet old man named Elias Brooke, was found dead inside his workshop. He was discovered by his apprentice, a nervous young man named Simon. Elias sat slumped over his workbench, his spectacles still perched on the end of his nose, and a silver pocket watch clutched tightly in his hand. The watch, too, read 6:42. Simon ran through the square, shouting for help. Within the hour, the police arrived, but the cause of death was unclear. There were no wounds, no struggle, no broken tools. Only that eerie stillness and a faint smell of oil and metal that hung in the air. The villagers whispered among themselves. Some said Elias had cursed the village clocks with his dying breath. Others believed it was a sign, a punishment for tampering with time. When Hercule Poirot arrived, summoned by an old acquaintance in the local police, he listened quietly as the sergeant explained. Every clock, sir, every single one, stopped dead at the same second he did. Poirot's expression was calm, thoughtful. He inspected the workshop. Rows of half-finished clocks, drawers filled with gears, springs, and screws. Dust hung in the golden light that slanted through the window. He spoke softly, almost to himself. Time can be a strange companion. It tells us much if we learn to listen. Poirot's sharp eyes fell on the workbench. A single clock lay open, its back removed. Inside, a small gear had been replaced, gleaming new brass against the dull metal of the rest. Why would a man replace just one gear, he murmured, in a clock that already works? The sergeant looked puzzled. Perhaps it broke? Poirot shook his head slowly. Perhaps this gear was meant to break something else. He lifted the small watch from Elias's hand, turning it over carefully. On the back, faintly scratched, were 3 initials, MBC. Do these mean anything to you? He asked Simon. The young apprentice shook his head quickly. No, sir. I've never seen them before. Poirot gave a small nod, slipping the watch into an evidence bag. Then we shall find out together. He walked to the door and looked across the quiet square, where every clock had indeed stopped. The hour hands pointed to the same place, like an accusation frozen in time. 6:42. Poirot whispered, a moment chosen for a reason. As he turned back toward the workshop, he noticed something else, a faint smear of oil on the doorknob, but not the same oil Elias used for his clocks. This one had a metallic scent, heavier, almost bitter. Poirot rubbed it between his fingers, eyes narrowing. Death, my friend, he said softly to himself, always leaves a fingerprint, even when it wears gloves. That night, as the fog settled over Belhaven, the village seemed suspended in silence. Not a single clock ticked. The people lay awake in their beds, staring into the dark, listening to nothing but the sound of their own breath. And somewhere, deep in the shadows, a clock that should have stopped kept ticking. Chapter 2. The Hands That Never Moved. The next morning, Belhaven was still. Mist clung to the streets, softening the edges of the cottages and swallowing sound. It was as though the world itself feared to disturb the silence that had taken hold since the clockmaker's death. Poirot stood outside the workshop, his gloved hands behind his back, eyes fixed upon the sign that hung above the door. Elias Brooke, master of timepieces. The sign creaked softly in the damp wind, the only movement in a place that had otherwise forgotten how to move. Inside, the air smelled of brass dust, varnish, and age. Rows upon rows of clocks lined the walls, grand pendulum clocks, ornate carriage clocks, even tiny watches arranged like soldiers awaiting command. Each one sat motionless, their hands frozen at the same haunting hour, 6:42. Poirot turned to Simon, the young apprentice who hovered anxiously by the door. "You found him here, yes? Exactly as he sits." "Yes, sir," Simon replied, his voice thin. "He was working late. He said he wanted to finish something important before morning." Poirot nodded slowly. "And you left him alone?" "I did. I went home at 10. He was still alive then." The detective's gaze drifted to the workbench again. The open clock, the replaced gear, and the silver watch that had now been carefully sealed in evidence. "You were fond of him?" Poirot asked gently. Simon swallowed. "He was like a father to me. Taught me everything. He said clocks were alive in their own way, that they told stories if you listen long enough." Poirot's expression softened for just a moment. Then his eyes sharpened again. "Tell me, my boy, did Mr. Brooke have enemies?" Simon shook his head quickly. "No one. Everyone loved him. He fixed clocks for free sometimes. He was just kind." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, but kindness could be a dangerous thing. It makes enemies of those who envy it." He moved toward the back of the workshop where a small safe stood half-hidden behind a stack of old boxes. It was open. Inside lay a pile of neatly folded papers, repair receipts, blueprints, letters. Poirot began sorting through them carefully. Among them was a newer envelope, the paper crisper, the ink darker. It was addressed simply, "To be opened only in the event of my death." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Interesting." He broke the seal and began to read. "To whoever finds this letter, if I am gone, know that it was not by accident. I have uncovered something terrible hidden within the very heart of time itself. They warned me to stop, but I could not. When all the clocks strike 6:42, you will understand. E.B." Poirot folded the letter carefully. Simon had gone pale. "What does it mean?" he asked, trembling. Poirot spoke quietly. "It means your master knew he was in danger, and perhaps he tried to leave a clue in the only language he trusted, the language of clocks." The sergeant entered just then, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Sir, we found something." They followed him down the lane to a cottage on the edge of the village. Inside lived Martha Bell, the housekeeper who had cleaned Elias Brooke's workshop every Friday for nearly 20 years. She sat near the fire, twisting a handkerchief nervously in her lap. "I didn't want to speak ill of the dead," she began, "but Mr. Brooke had been different lately. He wouldn't let me dust certain clocks. Said they were special. He kept one locked in a glass case. Said only he must handle it." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "A clock in a case, you say? And where is it now?" Martha's eyes flickered toward the window. "The police took it this morning." They returned to the station, where the glass case now sat on a table. Inside was a tall brass clock unlike any other, intricate, gleaming, its face marked not by numbers, but by tiny etchings of moons and stars. Poirot inspected it closely. The hands pointed to 6:42. He reached inside the case and turned the clock gently. It did not move, but when he tilted it under the light, he noticed something unusual, a faint discoloration near the hinge. "Sergeant," he said calmly, "bring me a screwdriver." With delicate precision, Poirot loosened the backplate. Inside, hidden within the hollow frame, was a small vial, empty, but marked with a faint residue of dark liquid. The sergeant frowned. Poison? Poirot nodded slightly. Yes, but not for a man to drink. This was used for a mechanism. A device, perhaps. Something meant to release its contents at a very specific time. Simon gasped. You mean someone used one of the clocks to kill him? Poirot turned toward the young man, his eyes gleaming. Not just one clock, my friend. All of them. A chain reaction, triggered by the master himself, or by someone who understood his craft as well as he did. He straightened, his voice lowering. This was not merely murder. This was design. Precision. Every tick planned. That night, Poirot returned alone to the workshop. He sat in the chair where Elias Brooke had died and looked around at the silent clocks. Their still hands gleamed faintly in the moonlight. He thought about the letter, the poison, the initials on the watch, MBC, and the apprentice who seemed too nervous, too eager to please. Poirot whispered softly into the silence. The answer, mon ami, no, the answer, my friend, lies in the moment the world stood still. He leaned back, his eyes on a clock face above the door. The hands remained frozen at 6:42. Yet for the first time, Poirot felt certain they were pointing, not to a time, but to a name. Chapter 3. The Moment That Would Not Die. The following day dawned cold and pale. The mist that had cloaked Belhaven was thinning, but a strange stillness still hung in the air. The villagers moved quietly, speaking in low voices, as though afraid their words might start the clocks again. Poirot sat by the window of the small inn, sipping his tea with slow, thoughtful precision. On the table before him lay a collection of notes, Elias Brooke's letter, sketches of the mysterious brass clock, and a list of names that seemed to circle one another like the gears of a hidden mechanism. Simon had left early that morning, saying he needed to clear his head. Poirot had simply nodded, watching him go. There was fear in the boy's eyes, not the grief of loss, but the trembling of someone who knew more than he dared to say. As Poirot finished his tea, he noticed something curious. Across the street, a woman stood in front of the clockmaker's workshop, her face pale, her gloved hand resting against the locked door. She appeared to be praying. Poirot set down his cup, adjusted his hat, and stepped outside. The air carried the faint scent of rain and oil. "Madam," he said gently as he approached, "you knew Mr. Brooke, yes?" She startled, then turned toward him. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm Margaret Clark. My husband and Mr. Brooke were business partners once, many years ago." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Ah, Clark. The same initials engraved upon the watch. MBC." Margaret's breath caught. "You found it." "Indeed." Poirot watched her carefully. "May I ask what those initials stand for?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "They stand for Matthew Benjamin Clark. My husband. He died 5 years ago." Poirot's voice remained calm, though his thoughts began to race. "And Mr. Brooke kept your late husband's watch?" "Yes," she whispered. "They were close friends once. They built clocks together, magnificent ones. But something happened. Matthew accused Elias of stealing one of his designs. They quarreled terribly. When my husband died, Elias came to the funeral. He asked for forgiveness. He said time would reveal the truth." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Time, yes. And perhaps it has." He thanked her politely and returned to the workshop. There, he found the sergeant waiting. "Another odd thing, sir," the sergeant said. The coroner finished his report. No sign of poison in Mr. Brooke's body, but there was a faint trace of metal dust in his lungs. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the workbench. "Metal dust? You mean he inhaled it?" "Seems so." Poirot looked around the room, every clock staring back with lifeless faces. A man dies in a room full of clocks, and every clock stops at the same time. Yet none of them broke. That means someone stopped them, or something did. He walked to the large brass clock in the glass case and touched the rim gently. His fingertips came away with a thin layer of dark dust. "The residue of time," he murmured. "Or perhaps the residue of something more deliberate." The sergeant frowned. "You think someone tampered with the clocks?" Poirot nodded slowly. "I do not think. I know." He examined the clock more closely and found another faint marking etched into the brass plate. A signature, almost invisible. MBC. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "So this clock was not made by Elias Brooke alone. It was made with his former partner. And if I am correct, it hides the secret of both their lives." He motioned for the sergeant to bring him the silver watch once more. When he opened the back, he saw something he had missed before. A second set of hands, smaller, almost invisible beneath the main face. They were set not to 6:42, but to 9:15. Poirot smiled faintly. "A message," he said, "hidden in plain sight. 6:42, 9:15, times that do not belong to the same story, yet they speak to each other." He looked up. "Sergeant, where is the apprentice?" "Simon? Haven't seen him since morning." Poirot's gaze darkened. "Then I fear we shall see him soon enough." As the sun began to set, Poirot walked alone to the edge of the village, where an abandoned windmill stood against the fading sky. He had noticed earlier that its old clock face, though broken, also pointed to 6:42. Someone had taken great effort to make sure every timepiece in Belhaven showed the same hour, even those that hadn't worked in years. He entered the mill quietly. The air was cold, filled with the faint echo of creaking wood. And then he heard it, a slow, rhythmic ticking. One clock was still running. In the center of the room stood Simon, his eyes wide and wild, a small clock in his trembling hands. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice shaking. "You always find out." Poirot stopped a few feet away. "You killed him." Simon's lips quivered. "No, I didn't mean to." He was going to destroy it, the last clock they made together. He said it was cursed, that it shouldn't exist. Poirot's voice was calm, almost kind, and you could not bear to lose it. Simon nodded helplessly. "It was perfect. Every gear, every spring, it was like life itself. He told me to dismantle it, but when I refused, he threatened to end my apprenticeship. I only meant to stop him for a moment. I released the gas from the mechanism, just a little, but he wouldn't leave the workshop. He breathed it in. He broke off, shaking. When he fell, I panicked. I thought if I stopped all the clocks, it would look like something else. Like fate." Poirot took a slow step forward. "And the letter? You planted it." Simon shook his head. "No, he wrote it himself. He knew what would happen. He said time would claim him, and me too, if I wasn't careful." Poirot's eyes softened, though his voice remained steady. "And now, you stand before me, holding the last piece of your crime. The clock that should have died with its maker." Simon stared down at the clock, its faint ticking growing faster, louder. His face twisted in panic. "It's not stopping," he whispered. "It's speeding up." Poirot lunged forward. "Put it down." Simon dropped the clock onto the floor. It shattered, gears and glass flying across the room. A small hiss escaped, a puff of metallic smoke rising into the air. Poirot covered his mouth with a handkerchief as Simon stumbled backward, coughing violently. Moments later, it was silent again. The ticking had stopped. The air cleared. Simon sank to his knees, shaking. He was right, he whispered. "Time doesn't forgive." Poirot looked down at the broken clock. Its face was split cleanly in two, the hands frozen between 6:42 and 9:15. The moment of death, Poirot murmured, and the moment of truth. He turned away, his voice quiet but firm. "You may not have meant murder, my boy, but you built it all the same." As Simon was taken away that night, the villagers of Belhaven gathered once more in the square. One by one, their clocks began to tick again, hesitant, uneven, as though the heartbeat of time itself was returning to life. Poirot stood by the window of the workshop, gazing at the moonlit village. For the first time in days, the air was moving again. He smiled faintly. "Time," he said softly, "always repairs itself, but never without a cost." Chapter 4. The Last Tick of Time. The rain began just after midnight, tapping softly against the windows of the Belhaven police station. The lamps flickered, their yellow glow casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Inside, Simon sat at a desk, his hands cuffed loosely before him, eyes fixed on nothing. He looked small, shrunken, as though the truth had taken more from him than any sentence ever could. Poirot entered quietly, the brim of his hat glistening with rain. He removed it, setting it on the table, and looked at the young man with something between pity and disappointment. "You have slept?" he asked gently. Simon shook his head. "How can I sleep? Every time I close my eyes, I hear it, the ticking. Even now, I still hear it." Poirot sat opposite him. "Because guilt, my friend, is louder than any clock." The sergeant approached with a cup of tea, setting it down before Simon, then nodded to Poirot and left them alone. The detective waited in silence for a few moments before speaking again. "There is something you should understand," Poirot said softly. "Elias Brooke did not die only because of your mistake. He died because of the past, because of something that began long before you were born." Simon lifted his head, confusion in his tired eyes. "What do you mean?" Poirot leaned back, folding his hands. "When I examined the brass clock, the one you call perfect, I found two signatures inside its casing. One belonged to Elias Brooke. The other was that of Matthew Benjamin Clark, the man who once worked beside him. The two men were not simply partners in craft, Simon. They were rivals in genius." He opened his notebook, showing Simon a sketch of the brass mechanism. "This clock, the one you try to protect, was their masterpiece and their curse. It was designed to synchronize every clock within its reach, a network of timepieces bound together by resonance. A beautiful dream, to make time flow evenly through the village. But something went wrong." Simon frowned. "The gas." Poirot nodded. "Yes. Clark designed the synchronization using a chemical vapor, harmless in small amounts, but deadly if trapped. The idea was to let the clocks breathe, as he called it, adjusting to the air around them. But the chemical corroded the mechanisms. Clark wanted to abandon the project. Brooke refused. Their argument destroyed their partnership. And when Clark died, Brooke buried the invention until he met you." Simon's shoulders trembled. "He said we were building something new, something that would make him proud again." Poirot's gaze softened. He was proud, but also afraid. He knew the device was flawed. The letter he left, it was not written in fear of murder. It was a confession. He believed he had unleashed something he could not stop. Simon's voice cracked. "So he was already dying?" "In a sense," Poirot said quietly. "He had been breathing in the dust of his own creation for years. The final release of gas only hastened what time had already begun. You were not the poison, Simon, only the spark." Tears slipped down Simon's cheeks. "Then why did he keep going?" Poirot looked out the window, where the rain traced silver lines down the glass. "Because that is what creators do. They chase perfection, even when it destroys them. Elias Brooke could not stop time. He could only wound it." He stood, placing a gentle hand on Simon's shoulder. "The law will judge you, yes. But take comfort in this. Your master forgave you long before his final breath. The proof is in the watch." He set the silver pocket watch on the table. When Simon looked down, he saw that its face no longer read 6:42. The hands had moved. Slowly, quietly, it now marked 6:43. "It ticked again this morning," Poirot said softly. "Perhaps a coincidence. Or perhaps his final act of mercy." Simon stared at it through blurred eyes. He always said clocks have souls. Maybe he was right. Poirot gave a small, weary smile. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we give them souls ourselves when we listen long enough. He turned to leave, his coat brushing softly against the doorframe. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night was clear, and above the rooftops, the clock tower in the village square began to chime again. Once, twice, and then 12 times, echoing across the sleeping houses. The people of Belhaven awoke to the sound, hearts lifting as though time itself had returned to them. Poirot stood in the square, watching the tower clock gleam in the moonlight. Every face around him was alive again, every clock ticking, every gear turning. The village had been restored. He took a slow breath. The order of time is fragile, he murmured. One broken moment can silence the world. But even broken things, when understood, can begin again. He looked down at his reflection in a puddle where the hands of the tower clock shimmered behind him. "Elias Brooke," he said quietly, "you have your peace now." Then he turned, walking away as the chimes faded into the soft whisper of the night. And so, another mystery closes, not with the sound of a gunshot, but the gentle tick of time restored. If you enjoyed this tale and wish to see Hercule Poirot unravel more secrets hidden in the quiet corners of England, then subscribe, like, and share this story. Each click keeps the mysteries alive, and each tick brings a new one closer. Until next time, my friends, keep listening. For even silence has a rhythm.